we're going to start our ceremonies for this evening. And first of all, I want to say Kate Mila here to Killone. And for those of you who may be making your maiden voyage to Killone, this was an Augustinian nunnery, and it is only one of three that survives even in ruin format here in Ireland at the moment. So it was a nunnery, and it was famous, of course, as well because there was a mermaid out there in the lake. But we're here today to celebrate one of the great Clare people, and we're honoured that so many people have turned up. And I want to introduce to you in the first instance the chairman of the Inniscoil Counter of Fianna Fáil, Tom Costello.
I am deeply honoured and privileged to be involved in the commemoration of the Barrett family of Dara, who played such a significant role in the struggle of Irish independence during both the War of Independence and the Civil War, and particularly today to Commandant Frank Barrett, officer commanding Mid-Clare Brigade from 1919, and later appointed commander of the anti-treaty IRA Western Division during the Irish Civil War, who was interred here in the beautiful surrounds of the 12th century Killone Abbey, New Hall.
Real Mahagod Tom. We move now to the next part of the ceremony, and we are going to have the Ennis Brass group play The Last Post, and Michael Neelan, part of my committee, he will raise the national flag during that. So The Last Post and raising of the national flag. It was men like Frank Barrett that allows us to stand here today and salute our own flag. And he was one of the very first, I suppose, and his colleagues back in the years that allowed that flag, first of all, to win its independence and to be raised and to represent us as a people. And to celebrate the raising of that flag, we will now have a song for Clare from Martin Casey.
Tonight, my friends, I'll sing a song, a toasting glass I'll raise to a place that means the world to me on the wild Atlantic way. A land where blessed feet once trod, where kings and princes roamed, a place of beauty and renown, Clare, my heart, my home. So raise your voices, one and all, sing out, let it be known, the banner's flying high tonight, in Clare, my heart, my home. Liscannor Bay and Moher Cliffs, great white Atlantic foam, and Burren's beauty uncompared, majestic land of stone. The rolling hills of Tulla, Inchikrone and Craiganone, all jewels in the crown that is Clare, my heart, my home. So raise your voices, one and all, sing out, let it be known, the banners flying high tonight, in Clare, my heart, my home. Across these lands are ancient ruins, once built by holy hand, from Scattery to Corcomroe, from Killaloe to Quinn, Kilfanora of the crosses, 7 carved from Burren stone, standing tall in sentinel of fate, in Clare, my heart, my home. So raise your voices, one and all, sing out, let it be known, the banners flying high tonight, in Clare, my heart, my home. And now it's time to bid farewell, this night must come to end, but I wish you peace and God's blessings until we meet again. And if ever you'll return again, of this you can be sure, you'll be welcome here with open arms, in Clare, my heart, my home. So raise your voices, one and all, sing out, let it be known, the banners flying high tonight, in Clare, my heart, my home.
Brilliant, Martin, brilliant. And my God, isn't it very appropriate that we're talking about the banners flying high today? No better time than when you're all Ireland champions. I nearly said we, and I Limerick man. I'm getting there, friends, I'm getting there. I'm delighted now to move on to our keynote speaker, and the man, I'm honoured indeed that we have here a man, first of all, that has deep connections back through his family to Frank Barrett, because his grandfather, John Minahan, was not alone an officer, the intelligence officer of the Mid-Clare Brigade, but then when the split came, and on the Republican side, he went with Frank Barrett, Frank, who was the commander of the Western Division, and John Minahan was his adjutant and first lieutenant. So I'm delighted to introduce the noted historian, a man who has done outstanding work with Mary Crawford and her team in ensuring that all of the activities during the War of Independence are properly commemorated. I'm delighted to introduce Paul Minahan.
I'm here on Clár, I'm here in a Hinsha, Bal de Cor Lacunda and Clár, a Chocta Dala, a Shanador, a Winter de Barrett, agus a Bal de Parliament de Horapuk, is a Gwini Ushla Golair. Our dús is more on an orm behan shot and yuv, con a Kaintra Hort, agus ta an Buikas arm or Fianna Fall, agus Goharvaha Winter Barrett, con a Gleka Corarm. On the 19th of January, 1921, 3 miles from here, at a place called Caharay, the largest ever forces of the Irish Republican Army deployed. Their objective was to ambush 3 or 4 lorries of RIC and Black and Tans that had begun to travel regularly from Ennis to Kilrush. they deployed in 3 sections. The main body of men, comprising about 60, took up a position along a by-road that ran northwest from Carré National School on high ground, and that road gave a commanding view towards Kilrush. Section 2 comprised about 14 men, and they were positioned also on high ground about a quarter of a mile on the left flank of the main force. Section 3 was made up of just 7 men, and they were positioned in fields to the southeast of the school and on the opposite side of the road to the rest of the main column. The RIC and TANs did not turn up as expected. Instead, as it began to get dark, the IRA men began to vacate their positions. And at that moment, scouts reported that a large number of lorries were coming from the Ennis direction. Those lorries stopped about 400 yards from the ambush site, and RIC and Black and Tans dismounted. They began to advance in force through the fields to the southeast, with the intention of outflanking the column. The Tanzan military were engaged by the 7 men in Section 3, and there ensued a fierce firefight, gun battle, that held the Crown forces at bay. It was by now nearly dark, and it was difficult for the other sections to come to the support of Section 3 without endangering their own men. After a while, once it was clear that Section 3 had withstood the attack and had withdrawn to safety, the entire column withdrew to the south and to the north. It was clear that the British had advanced notice of the ambush. And given the overwhelming superiority of the British forces, the IRA had bravely and successfully repulsed them and had avoided an encirclement. The officer in overall command that day was Frank Barrett, OC of the Mid-Clare Brigade, and Carré was just one of innumerable actions carried out by men under his command during the War of Independence and Civil War. Francis Michael Barrett was born on the 11th of April 1891 at Barnageeha, Dara, Ennis, County Clare, in the parish of Killone. He was the 3rd son of Sylvester and Joanna Barrett, née Cotter, and one of a family of 16, 10 boys and 6 girls. He attended Balliet National School. The Barretts were farmers and an old and respected Fenian family. Frank was bright. At the age of 21, in 1912, he applied for and was appointed to the position of Master of the Ennis Union Workhouse by a unanimous decision of the board. Frank Barrett was one of a generation of young men and women born towards the end of the 19th century who formed part of what today we would describe as a particular type of youth culture. They were restless and they shared a strong desire for change. They were strongly influenced by the Gaelic revivalist movement, and importantly, they did not consider that the politicians of their day represented their values or their views, and they regarded the Irish Parliamentary Party as nothing more than an ally of the British establishment. Steeped in the Fenian tradition, Frank joined the newly rejuvenated Irish Republican Brotherhood and in 1914 the Irish Volunteers. When Ernest Blythe visited Clare in 1915, during which time he met Frank Barrett, he described Clare in general as the very worst county in Ireland for volunteer organisation. All that was soon to change. In January 1917, Clare broke with Limerick and became a brigade in its own right. Patrick Brennan of Meelick was appointed OC of the Clare Brigade, and Frank Barrett was appointed Vice OC. And this new leadership was visionary and was fearless. 2 events in 1917 catapulted Clare to the forefront of the struggle for independence. First, the East Clare by-election brought prominent leaders such as Constance Markovitz, Owen MacNeill, Arthur Griffith and of course Eamon de Valera to Clare, and this greatly boosted Sinn Féin in the county. Secondly, Clare was the first county in Ireland to recommence public parading and drilling of volunteers after the 1916 Rising. This resulted in a chain of events. It involved the arrest of about 40 officers across Ireland, half of whom were from Clare, and the famous Mountjoy hunger strike, forced feeding of the prisoners, and the death of Tomás Ashe, President of the Supreme Council of the IRB, were momentous events in Irish history. Despite this tragedy, this series of events breathed new life into the volunteer movement, and given the lead role played by the Clare volunteers, it put Clare front and centre of the struggle for independence. In 1918, the IRA as it was called now, was restructured, and Clare was divided into 3 brigades. The East Clare Brigade under Michael Brennan, the West Clare Brigade under Art O'Donnell, and the Mid Clare Brigade OC was Frank Barrett. The Mid Clare Brigade comprised 5 battalions, later 6, with a brigade headquarters. Each battalion was further divided into a number of companies. So, for example, here in Dara, this was part of A Company, Ballyea, 2nd Battalion, Mid Clare Brigade. The 2nd Battalion comprised the areas of Ballyea, Inch, Connolly, Lissycasey, Ballycorrig, Kilmaley and Clarecastle. To give an idea of the depth of involvement of the Barrett family in the struggle, Bernard Barrett was captain of A Company, in which William was also a volunteer. As we've heard, his brother-in-law Pappy Costello from Edenvale was Commandant of the 2nd Battalion, Michael was Vice-Commandant and Sylvester was Adjutant, until his imprisonment in June 1921, when he was succeeded to that position by Bernard. Joe Barrett was on the brigade staff as OC of Operations. Jack Barrett, who died later in France fighting with the French Foreign Legion, had been involved in the Howth gun running. Vincent Doe Minor was also a volunteer. In fact, he was imprisoned until they found out he was a minor and they released him. The Barrett sisters were equally involved in coming on. Josie was OC of the Mid Clare Brigade, Delia was treasurer of the 2nd Battalion, Lil, Peg and Francis were all members of A Company, and many of the wives of the Barretts were also members. The Mid Clare Brigade stretched from the Atlantic seaboard to Spanish Point, from Spanish Point to Ballyvaughan. Its eastern boundary was a line drawn down from the Galway border near Ballinrowan to west of Quinn and onto Latoon Bridge north of Newmarket on Fergus. In the south it ran from Latoon across the Shannon to Ballycorrig Bridge, then followed the line south of Lissycasey and back to Spanish Point. At the truce on the 11th of July 1921, membership of the Mid Clare Brigade was about 2,300 volunteers and about 700 coming on. Frank Barrett was an excellent organiser. From its creation, he brought the Mid Clare Brigade up to a very high standard. Companies had to drill and hold parades frequently and punctually. Regular reports had to be supplied to battalion officers at fixed periods, with summaries given to the Brigade HQ. Each battalion was required to give regular returns in respect of munitions and funds, and unofficial acts by individual volunteers, such as cattle drives or other forms of agrarian trouble, were strictly stamped out. Brigade and battalion council meetings were held approximately once a month, and until the officers were obliged to go on the run, meetings were usually held in the Clare Hotel in Ennis, which also had connections, of course, to the Barrett family. In his seminal book, Michael Collins and the Making of a New Ireland, Pierce Beasley argues that it was really in County Clare that the guerrilla warfare may be said to have started. And he cites first the attacks on Inch and Connolly RIC huts on the 19th of July 1919. Joe, Michael, Sylvester and Bernard Barrett were all involved in the attack at Inch. The decision to attack those barracks was made by Frank Barrett and the Brigade Council in June. The objective was to force the RIC to abandon smaller stations, and these attacks, together with attacks on other barracks at that time in Clare, resulted in the RIC withdrawing from smaller barracks and huts across 1919 and 1920. We know from the excellent research in this area by local historian Ger Brown, that in 1918 there were about 42 occupied barracks and huts in the Mid Clare Brigade area. And by 1921 there were just 9, and 3 of those were in the 2nd Battalion area. This process resulted in the RIC, the main instrument of the Crown in this country, becoming even more isolated and alienated, and was the beginning of the end of effective British rule in rural Ireland. As OC of the brigade, Frank Barrett personally led some ambushes and actions, including Moyrisk in September 1920, Caharay and Tuna in 1921. However, most actions were delegated to the brigade column under Joe Barrett or local battalions. Many of those actions are, of course, today well known, such as Veneen, Monreal and Rowan. By necessity, only a small number of volunteers, about 30, were members of the brigade column that was formed in November 1920. These men were wanted and were on the run, and billeting them was an ongoing challenge, though numbers were also limited by the availability of rifles. However, large numbers of volunteers in Commandant assisted in other important ways by providing safe houses, acting as scouts and couriers, engaging in road trenching, road blocking, medical support, intelligence gathering and storing arms and ammunition. On any given day from 1919 until July 1921, there was incessant daily activity by IRA volunteers and Commandant in the Mid-Clare Brigade area. Many lesser-known attacks occurred across the brigade area. For example, local to here, on the 29th of July 1920, volunteers led by Michael Barrett attacked a lorry of military escorting a mail car at Decamad, Lissycasey. There was an attack on Tirmaclean RIC barracks on the 18th of May 1921, and sniping engagements about Clarecastle and Kildysford barracks to prevent the resumption of RIC patrols, also in 1921. These were mainly or wholly the work of the 2nd Battalion. It was in the 2nd Battalion area that the brigade column was quartered for most of the period between March and July 1921. As a consequence, Crown forces travelling the road between Ennis and Lissycasey were frequently fired upon by snipers. On the 9th of June 1921, a party of about 20 of the brigade column assembled at short notice, 20 minutes notice, and attacked a much larger force of auxiliaries close to here at Dara Cross. In fact, I passed the ambush site on my way here. And as a consequence, the enemy regarded this area as a dangerous one. And Joe Barrett tells us that in the 3 to 4 month period prior to the truce, no house in the 2nd Battalion area was raided by the British military. Insomuch as the Mid-Clare Brigade were pioneers in guerrilla warfare, so too were the pioneers in intelligence. On intelligence matters, Frank Barrett reported to Director of Intelligence Michael Collins. Agents were appointed across the brigade who were unknown to each other. Members of the local population volunteered information. Mail was raided. Prisoners and suspected informers were interrogated, and contact was maintained with friendly members of the RIC. Reports were forwarded to Frank Barrett by some battalion intelligence officers on a daily basis and formed the basis for ambushes, sniping engagements, raids, interrogations, and saved many volunteers from capture or death. The military in Clare had sweeping powers throughout this period, and Frank Barrett was himself arrested without charge or trial in March 1920 and brought to Limerick jail. He was imprisoned in Limerick, Cork, Belfast, before being moved to Wormwood Scrubs on the 23rd of April. Together with other Sinn Féin prisoners, he was on hunger strike in Wormwood Scrubs for 16 days. During this period, large crowds of up to 5,000 would gather outside the prison to show their support, organised by the Irish Self-Determination League of Great Britain. Many of the prisoners fell into poor health, and fearing the creation of more martyrs, the authorities ultimately released them. With the truce in July 1921, there followed a period of great uncertainty and tragedy as the old IRA began to rupture. In a dispatch to Collins of the 16th of September, the intelligence officer of the Mid-Clare Brigade, Barrett was ill at the time, gives a valuable insight into Barrett's views on the possible outcome of peace negotiations yet to commence, stating that Frank Barrett never discussed the present situation only at council meetings. He has always encouraged the idea of another fight. From my own knowledge, he will not be satisfied with anything less than a republic. A majority of the officers and rank and file of the IRA were opposed to the treaty, particularly outside of Dublin. In April 1922, Commandant General Frank Barrett, as he was by then, was elected one of the 16 members of the Army Executive, and with the shelling of the forecourts, was one of the members of the Executive who signed a declaration urging the former comrades of the Irish Republic to return to their allegiance. Both opposing armies in the ensuing civil war adopted a divisional structure. So the pro-treaty or Free State 1st Western Division was under the command of General Michael Brennan, while the anti-treaty or Republican or IRA 1st Western Division was under the command of General Frank Barrett. The IRA 1st Western Division comprised the 3 Clare Brigades, together with 2 brigades in South Galway that includes Galway City. Most of the officers and men of the Mid-Clare Brigade joined the anti-treaty division, while most of the East Clare Brigade joined with the Free State. West Clare was more evenly split, 60-40 in fact, in favour of. As the Civil War progressed, the Republicans became increasingly outnumbered, as thousands of new paid recruits joined the Free State Army, an army that was better resourced, better supplied, better armed, and with access to modern artillery. Ultimately, arrests, summary executions of prisoners of war, lack of adequate arms, breakdowns in intelligence networks, and disruption of lines of communication took their toll on the IRA. In April 1923, Frank Barrett made the arduous journey across enemy lines to Liam Lynch's headquarters in the Knockmeal Down Mountains. The purpose was to update him on the position in the 1st Western Division, and that update was not good. In particular, widespread arrests and lack of ammunition were proving decisive. Following Liam Lynch's death on the 10th of April, members of the IRA Executive scattered across the mountains, pursued by an encircling Free State Army. Austin Stack, Sean Gaynor, Todd Andrews and Frank Barrett moved across the Knockmeal Down Mountains, seeking to avoid encirclement. They moved towards Mullinahone, to Crow Hill, and from there to the Nara Valley, where they were ultimately arrested. They were brought initially to Lismore Castle, then to Fermoy, and from there to Cork Jail. Some months later, he was transferred to Mountjoy. In April 1923, there's an estimated 13,000 Republicans being held prisoner without charge or without trial by the Free State. In October, large numbers were still imprisoned, and a hunger strike was declared by the Mountjoy prisoners that soon spread to other prisons. Frank Barrett and J.J. Classie from Ennis, adjutant of the Mid-Clare Brigade during the Civil War, were amongst the leaders of this hunger strike. Thus, Frank Barrett was on hunger strike again for a second time, this time for 25 days, until mid-November and his ultimate release. Frank Barrett was elected to Clare County Council for anti-treaty Sinn Féin in 1925, and he was a founding member of the new Fianna Fáil party under Eamon de Valera. In 1928, he was re-elected for Fianna Fáil. He was chairman of Clare County Council from 1928 until 1931, and of course the first Fianna Fáil chairman. Frank Barrett fell gravely ill on St Patrick's Day 1930 and succumbed to his illness on the 13th of April 1931. Just 3 weeks later, on the 4th of May 1931, his wife Delia Ní Costello, whom he married on the 3rd of September 1919, also died, leaving behind 4 young children, all under 8 years of age. Frank Barrett was and remains one of the towering figures of the struggle for independence in Clare. He was an outstanding organiser, an inspiring leader, a dedicated patriot and a true Fenian. The brigade that he formed and led was one of the most renowned of the War of Independence. The Mid-Clare Brigade pioneered both guerrilla warfare and IRA intelligence, and perhaps most importantly, maintained the trust, loyalty and confidence of the majority of the people whom it served. Frank Barrett's life was cut short due to the consequences of hunger strikes and the deprivations of active service, and in that sense he may be rightly regarded as being amongst those who gave their lives for Ireland. The War of Independence and Civil War was the defining period in the lives of the people who fought. There were young men and women, many little more than teenagers, most of whom would never again experience events so momentous or a greater sense of camaraderie, particularly amongst those on active service. In Frank Barrett's private documents is a letter from Martin Slattery of Dara, a member of the Brigade Column, written to Frank after emigrating to Chicago, and it captures the sentiment felt by many of them as the years passed and the events of their youth became a memory. And Martin wrote to Frank, "In my long and lonely hours, I often sit and think, what are all the boys doing? Memory is my very best friend. After all, there is no place on earth like Ireland. I fully realised that when I went aboard the Etheria, and all through the voyage I kept trying to sing The Green Hills of Clare. It almost broke my heart. Because even though wild, I was passionately fond of Clare and all the boys. I would give 50 years of my life to have the morning of the Caharay ambush back again." Ar yesh ar an animica, made the sad lie likely on their graves. Gamila Mahagan.
Thank you, Paul, for that inspiring address. And there's no doubt about it, we stand here in the shadow of a real hero of the Irish Republic. And we have inherited the right and the duty to always remember and to progress the values that he stood for and what we have been lucky enough to inherit from him. We will now move and we will ask the Mayor of Ennis, Councillor Colin Malloy, and I don't see Alan O'Callaghan here, unfortunately, he had a clash of things, and Cathal Crowe as a former Chairman of Clare County Council and a successor in that role of Frank Barrett, to lay the wreaths in tribute to it, a lake of Commandant law. We're also privileged that we have a group of young people here who hope will carry on the traditions that we're embracing and introducing them to today. They represent the coming within the Ennis Corla Counter, and they're going to be led by the Rooney of the Corla Counter, Angela Call, and they're going to lay lilies here at the foot of the grave. So they are Caoimhe O'Sullivan, Ethan Considine, Anya Walsh, Ethan Maguire, Aidan Williams, Avine O'Dwyer, or Farmore, Reno Suluan. Or the Bela Margaret, so give them a all of us there for that. And could I ask you, in memory, not just alone of Frank Barrett, but of all of the people who served with him and did their duty at the time, to observe a few minutes of silence. Solus Dei Ora Tulea. We will now have Michael McTighe to lead us in the national anthem.
Thank you, Seamus. Sheena Fina Fall Atafwi Aule Geran Windar Slew Hartin the Ranikun Fe void the ser Shantir ar shincher fasta, ni ogfer fin tira na fin trial. Anog da heim sa barna boel, leganer gwyl con bosh nusil. Legan ish greg, feilach na beler, shalif canig aran na vian.
There's a couple of things I would point out, that we're here when Frank Barrett of Ballyea and Dara, this area, led Clare forward and to success. And I suppose it's a nice coincidence that this year was also a Ballyea man that was leading Clare to success. So it's a nice coincidence, I thought. I'm delighted to introduce Senator Timmy Dooley.
Thanks very much, Seamus. Just at the outset, first of all, to thank all of you for turning out here today in such large numbers, to give due recognition to Frank Barrett, but not just to Frank Barrett, but for the entire team of men and women that played such an important role in the development and the foundation of our state. I think it's appropriate that Fianna Fáil would take the efforts that it has made today to take back to some extent the timing of such events. For far too long, another organisation in this state has attempted to usurp the great work and authority of the people who gave so much for the foundation of the state. They have attempted to rewrite the history of a time that was so seminal in setting this great nation on a path of independence. And I think the work that Seamus and his committee and Tom and others have done over the past number of years is a beginning of the taking back of that historical time and the lineage that has seen its way through. And no better than the Barrett family as an example of a family that continued from that time and worked through under the Fianna Fáil banner and played such an important role in the development of this state. We only have to remember Sylvester Barrett and the role that he played both in government here and in Europe. And it's often said that Ireland's freedom allowed it to take its place amongst the nations, and it did, and to go on to play such an important role at European level. And Sylvester Barrett did that to such a great extent, and indeed his son Frank, who will speak later, continued to play a role there in the overall administration of the European Parliament for many years. And we owe a great debt of gratitude to the Barrett family for the important role that they have played at national and international level, in addition to what was done here in Clare. So really just to compliment your committee for the work that you have done in recognising the role that was played, as I said at the outset, and the continuation of that. And I look forward to hearing the address from Cathal and Frank at a later stage. Thank you very much, Seamus.
Thanks, Timmy. Now could I introduce our TD, Cathal Crowe.
Thank you, Seamus. Just at the outset, to congratulate Seamus and all of the officers who've made this a success. We were hoping it wouldn't rain. It didn't rain. Fabulous music and such a crowd gathered here. It's a bleak enough day in August, but the summer, apart from that glorious All-Ireland win, Billy and Margaret, the summer has been pretty bleak apart from that one glorious day. But it's fantastic to see a crowd of people all commemorating someone who isn't confined in the annals of history. When you commemorate, you remember, and that is so important. 4 years ago, I had the great honour of wearing the chains of office of Clare County Council when I had the office of Mayor of Clare. And when you've had the celebrations and the few glasses of wine over in the council chamber, you go home that evening, you hold that chain in front of you, and you're holding a living piece of history. Each little medallion, and there's several holders of that office here: Tony Killone, Clare Collar, Pat Daly. I hope I haven't left anyone else, so God forgive me. But just when you hold those medallions, the history that's there, and Michael Brennan's name is there, but Frank Barrett's name is there. There's also a beautiful painting by NS artist Liam O'Mail Downick, which shows one of the first council meetings of that War of Independence period over in Quinn Castle. And around the ditches of Napoe Castle, around the ditches of Napoe Castle, there was a flying column. There was coming a man, women in the laneways that surrounded it, because every single member of Clare County Council in that period, uniquely in Ireland, every single member of Clare County Council, including Frank, was on the run from British forces. And it was an absolute betrayal of their legacy in 2020 for the government to suggest that we shouldn't have a commemoration for coming a man, or a national commemoration of the Irish Volunteers, that we should instead commemorate the Black and Tans and the Royal Irish Constabulary. You cannot whitewash history. You cannot whitewash one force that was here to subject the determination of Irish people for independence, whilst at the same time playing down the role of people like Frank Barrett, his wife Delia. And Paul is absolutely correct. Whilst the date of his death suggests the 1930s, He didn't live a long life. It was because of many evenings spent out in the cold, wet, being on the run, not knowing when he'd get home, would his house be burnt down, would his family be alive. That is the price that Mindon paid. And too often when we go to these commemorations, you'll very often see in the crowd the grandniece or the grandnephew, because that line of family blood, you rarely see a son or daughter. You do with the Barretts, thanks be to God, and they've played such an incredible role in public life in this country. But you rarely at commemorations meet a son, a daughter, a grandson, a granddaughter, because in a moment, in a botched ambush, in a bullet, a stray bullet, a life is lost, and that family lineage goes with it. It is so important that we commemorate the major role that Frank Barrett and all of his family and the men and women of the Mid-Clare Brigade played in that period. I just want to, at the end, just thank the Barrett family overall for that incredible service they gave. I personally have to thank Frank, a grandson of Frank Barrett, for opening the first door for me in politics. I arrived over to Brussels as a spotty teenager hoping to get a bit of work, and that was the first door in that opened for me in politics, a door that I pushed through and have kept going. It is wonderful to see so many people here today, and those who currently serve in elected office. We have our councillors here. We've Billy Kelleher MEP, Senator Timmy Dooley, myself, and we've former officer holders here like Margaret Murphy O'Mahony and Tony Killone, who was a proud carrier of that flag for Clare. We only sit on the shoulders of giants. We have to be very cognizant of this all the time. The sacrifice that they made matters so important. And can I just finally say, given that this has been organised in the name of Fianna Fáil, that slogan we have, Fianna Fáil, the Republican Party, cannot be allowed to be a subtext. It cannot be hidden away. And 4 years ago, when our party was at a low ebb, we had one of those thinkings that the media obsessed about, and there was live tweeting coming out of it, but we did a bit of soul searching, and there was one common theme. When minister after TD after senator, when they all took to the floor and spoke rawly, every one of them joined that party, some because the green blood flowed through their veins for generations, but other people joined because that subtext mattered far more. The ideal of a united Ireland, the Republican Party, and everything that means. And republicanism doesn't belong in the 1920s. It has such a modern relevance, whether it's in the realm of poverty, homelessness, wanted a good hospital system. It matters so much in the current era. And it is a betrayal if we suddenly allow that to become a subtext. It has to be front and centre to our party. And the last slogan, because Seamus has mentioned it many times, on a Clare jersey, na Céadin sa Cáitis na Durica as, the first into battle and the last out. God rest your soul, Frank, and all the men and women of the Mid-Clare Brigade, and well done on a fantastic commemoration, Seamus.
Thanks, Con. Any of you that go back to the local afterwards, there will be a display there of the panels that give the whole history of the Mid-Clare Brigade. Mary Crawford there and Paul, they were very instrumental in putting all of that together. And it's most informative. The name of all the battalions and the companies and things like that are on it. So it'll be a thing of interest and a thing well worth viewing if you have the opportunity to go back. We're delighted and we're very honoured indeed that when we first conceived the idea of commemorating Frank Barrett, Frank Barrett, the grandson of Frank, was fully enthused and behind it, as was the whole family. And I'm now delighted to introduce Frank Barrett to you.
Thanks very much, Seamus. Well, On behalf of all of the Barrett family, and there are many of all of Frank's grandchildren are here today, but nieces and nephews and grandnieces and grandnephews and a wide range of cousins are here, and we are all extremely grateful to Innes Fianna Fáil Corla Counter for organising this event. We deeply appreciate the effort that has gone into making this what we believe to be a very remarkable event that we are very proud to be able to come along to. I would like to thank everybody who was involved in organising, in the preparation, and everybody who was involved in today's ceremonies, and all of you for coming here on what is not a great day, and it's not the easiest place to come to on a potentially wet day. So we're extremely grateful to you all for having done so. Finally, I would like, on behalf of the family, to invite any of you that are able to do so to join us in the local inn, which is on the Kildysart Road. For those of you who are not from Ballyea, you go out onto the road, go out onto the Kildysart side of the parish and head west. And you'll see it fairly quickly there. Hopefully there'll be some pleasant refreshments and some light bites and things like that to eat there, and we can all have a chance to sit and talk. And thank you very much indeed to everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. And let me again, just before we finish up, there's going to be the lowering of the flag, so please bear with us. But the presence here of so many people would energise any committee or any individuals. And we're so grateful to you all for turning up here in such a large crowd. And we look forward to joining together again as the Fianna Fáil, the Republican Party, to celebrate and commemorate other such events within our area. Again, I want to thank my committee. They were extraordinary. And the fact that the grass was cut, the grounds were cleared, everything was prepared, flagpoles put up, due to, I'm not going to name them because there are too many of them on the committee, which are seen around and probably still working at this stage, but give them a huge full of us. I would now ask the brass band if they would play the Revella, and Michael Neal will lower the flag. Tommy Craig got a meal Maha Grave, August, Slana Walla, live.